All right, it's officially afternoon, so I can say good afternoon and welcome to the closing session of our 2013 People in Technology Forum. We have had over 300 people register and participate in the event over the past 2 days. We've had equally that many people online, and I know a number of the folks are busy setting up their research demonstrations. I'm going to talk to you for a little bit, and then we're going to proceed over for the demos. So I'm not going to get the quote exactly right. The Glass folks are going to look this up for me while I talk. But something from Shakespeare in Love, if you want to really reach your audience, they've got to laugh, they've got to cry, and you've got to have a bit with the dog. And I'm not sure you're going to be brought to tears, but we do have the bit with the dog at the end, so you can hold in there for that. When we were designing this program for this year, we were talking about, we're going to have Internet of Things, and specifically the human edge of the Internet of Things, and we were going to talk about Google Glass and wearables in a post-mobile world. And we were amongst ourselves, we said, what is the heart, what is the underlying question that we are addressing in all of these discussions? And it came up in the discussion and said, well, we're talking about the future of being human, the future of how people participate and engage, and all of the implications around these possible technological advances. What is it going to mean for us as human beings? And so with a bit of a whirlwind, probably more slides than is appropriate for this time of day, I want to take you through a number of ways that we continue to ask this question of what is the future of being human? What kind of questions are we asking at Georgia Tech? What questions are we asking in IPaT? And the content of this talk is actually going to be the basis for our Future Media Outlook, which we will publicize at the beginning of next year. So some fun charts. When I was a graduate student a long time ago, back before I was part of the Lunatic Fringe, but as a graduate student, Bruce Tognazini, you remember Bruce was one of the luminaries in HCI, and he would give his opening talk about how to design human-computer interactions. And he would say, okay, well, what do we know about technology? We know that technology is changing with exponential bounds, and he would run across the stage and draw this huge graph. He was not wearing heels at the time. And then he would say, well, what do we know about people? He says, here's what we think about people. And he would run across and he would do this straight line. And he was speaking from a human factors perspective. He was speaking from the notion that our perceptual systems, how we see and how we process information and how we touch our bodies don't really change that much. And the implication for him was clear, which is that the interesting part was that technology curve. But Bruce had it wrong, because if nothing else, people gravitate, people change dramatically. People are willing to wear computers on their faces. People are accessing Google. People are interacting on social media. People change in tremendous ways with respect to technology. And so that curve is in no way flat. But what we have witnessed over the past decades, at least in my career and before, has been this powerful dynamic of how people are changing. And in reality, the curve looks like this, because people and technology are changing together. Technology will lead, people will follow, people will do new and interesting things. Google will change what Google Glass does in the future. Companies will come, companies will go. It is this intertwined relationship, and I think for those of you who participated in the panel and saw the panel this morning, that was what we were speaking to, was that it was not just an exponential curve of technology, but the real questions were in this relationship. And we can attempt to quantify this, but some of the other ways I have talked about this is that think of this as a dance. And that if you're an experienced designer, technology designer, user interface designer, or just someone who is working within the space, you're not designing technology, but you're designing dances. Because technology will move in one way, and people will react, or they will continue forward, or they may do something completely unexpected. And we have seen, if you think about all the technologies that are out there, you have seen elegant dances, you have seen powerful dancers, you have seen technology that clearly has two left feet. And if you think about the future of being human, for today, let's think about this as the future of many different dances that are taking place in our society. And what will those dances look like when we come back together in a year? What should we be doing at Georgia Tech to create new dances? And what are going to be the dances that are the fabric of our society? So for the time this morning, I want to talk about kind of a group of different dances that start with people in different ways. So I want to talk about what it means in terms of the future of the human body and how we've started with the human body as a basis for new innovations within technology. Then I want to move that it's not only just our body, but how we interact in space, how we interact as a community, and then how we interact as a society or as a network society. So let's start with the body. When you think about our eyes and our ears, we have made terrific advances in terms of how we perceive the digital world in a way that we recognize as natural or true to form for what our human body tells us is real. Wayne Wooden, one of our fantastic alumni, was here last week from Pixar and just showed the amazing advances in computer animation. This is actually work by Greg Turk, one of our professors here, that we can create worlds, digital worlds, that our eyes no longer have the ability to tell us that this isn't real. Right? And this is night and day from where we were just a couple of decades ago. And so our eyes are now interacting with the digital world, and now, of course, now we've had recent advances in voice speech technology based on deep learning. So I won't say that we have language understanding completed yet, but massive advances in terms of a system being able to recognize and respond to our voice. And of course, pattern recognition goes in multiple ways. A good bit of the work in visual analytics looks at our human minds and our ability to process tremendous amounts of information because how we recognize patterns in the world. So this is continued dance back and forth of what we come armed to interaction with our bodies and what computers are able to do. Some of the work that's more recent, this is Karen Liu in motion reconstruction. So the ability of both computer animation to be able to create realistic human motion, but then to be able to recognize that music motion and do something fun with it. So this is actually the basis for a game where I can be standing and interacting with the system, and I can do something like this, and then suddenly I'm Spider-Man, and I've now webbed up to a wall, and I'm doing this back and forth, and my avatar in the game is now responding and webbing through the city. Right? So this ability of being able to work with our motion and then translate that into something fantastical is almost now commonplace. We just have this expectation. And my kids are addicted to the Kinect as much as anyone else in terms of what we're able to do there. So where is this leading us? Well, some of the areas have now taken this from the notion of gesture into a gaming sense and are bringing this into workplace environments. So yesterday you heard Jeffrey talk about software-defined networking. One of the applications of this for our team at Georgia Tech is a system called Magic Window. SDN is the power that's driving these interactive videos, but what Russ Clark is able to do with the system is based on the gesture not only of his hands, kind of a true connect gesture, but just the orientation of his head and the orientation of his body is changing his viewpoint into these other places. So instead of awkward controls or instead of having fixed viewpoint for teleconferencing or just a talking head, we now have a much more fluid and interactive system that is, again, just reacting to the natural scope of his body. And so at Georgia Tech, we're taking this notion of what does it mean for bodies to interact, not just within our body, but also in the world of human-robot interaction. So this is a slightly older image, but I love this project. This is one of our robots who is jamming with other musicians. And I've always said that if we could solve the question of how I would interact, who wants to be my robot today? I'll pick on Renata. So if I'm going to interact and I'm a musician jamming and Renata is a robot and jamming, and I can look at her and bob with the beat, and then her head is also now bobbing with the beat. We make eye contact, and then she picks up the riff and moves on. Right? Something completely natural with musicians, but now the ability of human-robot interaction to follow this natural gesture, to follow the notion of eye contact, to follow the notion of we've made a connection, now it's your turn. We can do that now with musicianship. So what is the future of how our bodies interact with these artificial bodies? And so tremendous work this year, just released out of Charlie Kim's laboratory, is perfecting the art of robotic touch. So in this case, this is an assistant robot working with this gentleman who is all but completely paralyzed. And robots, for any of you who have worked in this field, have known that we really wanted to keep them at an arm's distance for safety reasons, right? This is a massive machine, powerful, and quite unsafe if you get too close. Well, we now have robotic textures that are able to work with the incidental glance, the incidental touch, that are able to wipe a gentleman's face after eating lunch, help him shave, or pull up the covers to keep him warm. Right? So this question of now robotic interaction in our bodies is becoming closer and closer. What are our expectations around that? And so for those of you who are familiar with the world of human-robot interaction, you know that there's been this notion of Uncanny Valley for quite some time. And Uncanny Valley is that sense of when you know something just isn't quite right, something isn't quite real. And in robotic design, it is focused on the visual appearance. It is focused on the question of, okay, this thing looks like it's a human being, but I can tell it's not, but it's so close it makes me uncomfortable. And actually the comparison is that it probably looks like a recently dead body, right? There's just not quite enough life there. So we're entering a new realm with respect to bodies, and respect to gesture, and respect to human-robot interaction. When do we enter in the Uncanny Valley based on interaction, not just based on appearance? When is a robotic touch not quite right? When is a robotic interaction more unsettling than it is natural? And Charlie is starting to see some of this work, and I will not take questions on all the other opportunities in robotic touch. But this notion of, you know, if a touch is kind of perfunctory, or if it's functional, if it's the wiping off of the crumbs, or if it's the assistance with shaving, that's okay. But if it's a little too personal, or a little too casual, or just not quite robotic enough, then it becomes quite unsettling. So what does it mean as we think about the future of our bodies, and we think about the future of gesture, and we think about the future of digital worlds and digital experiences that are so close but not quite real? How do we design for that, and what will that look like in the future? Because as I think it was actually Blair who said in the panel, if we define our world by what is possible, you know, that is anarchy. If we define our world and design by what is possible, we can actually have many unintended consequences within that interaction. So of course we are not just physical creatures, ugly bags of water, is that the Star Trek quote? Not just our bodies, but how do we interact in physical spaces? So this is actually a picture I stole from Blair of his augmented reality work back in Columbia around 1993. Right, so this is the extension of the human body. So what you don't see in the picture is the 25 pounds or more of 7 computers so that you could see the beautiful red outlines of how to try to fix a copier or a printer. So we've started, you know, even back in the early 90s, this question of how do we augment our spaces? How do we put information out there? And that's been our focus this morning and much of what we've talked about. So this is mobile augmented reality of this year, right? So now it's not, you know, blurry red lines and 7 computers and more weight than you can ever manage carrying, but it's a smartphone that is a lens into your world. And you can just start to augment, you can start to put information that is out there. And clearly that's been a topic that we've considered this morning, consider every day in our research here. So some of the things that we've done is, okay, well, we're not actually sure how to augment our world. What does that mean? What is possible? So one of the answers of many computer scientists in this realm is to say, well, let's just make it easier. What we want is not for the technologically elite to try to define what augmented reality would look like, but we want any designer, any interaction designer, any information designer to be able to do this. So our Argon, our augmented reality browser, is intended to do that. So you can Google this, you can look it up. This is technology that is available out in the world, but its intent is that anyone who could write a web page could start writing augmented reality experiences. So how do we lower the bar? But the second is that we want to start to understand what these technologies mean in terms of our interaction and our ability to think of space in new ways. So I hope Nerd Herder is being demoed later on this afternoon. If not, you'll have to convince Blair to do it. But Nerd Herder is one of the many games that has come out of this laboratory where the users have smartphones, and they're orienting their smartphones to this piece of paper, and there is a digital world, a mythical world. In this case, it's a world of nerds that are attracted to donuts, and they run from paperwork. Seems reasonable. And you interact and you compete in the game by messing with the nerds. He's done similar work in shooting up zombies and some other kind of other typical gaming genres. What's exciting here for me in terms of thinking about space is not just the AR technology, but what happens socially around that technology. So I have two children, ages 11 and 8, and I have all seen what I think all parents have seen, the tunnel effect, right? It was the Nintendo DS, and now it's the iPad, and they're locked into this world, and they could just be sitting on Mars for all they knew. They're into just that world. What happens with these technologies is that you look through the technology, and you look into what their minds are constructing is happening on this play space. And that's kind of fun and exciting, but if the design works, it becomes a shared space. And so instead of the kids sitting side by side, oblivious to each other, interacting with devices, they are now interacting with each other in a shared, socially understood space, and they know that if they see something on the table, then their playmates see the same thing on the table, and suddenly the space opens up. And the trash talk happens because they're messing with each other across the display, and the bodies come into play. There was another one called, Bragfish, where it was fishing and you could knock each other. So they actually start knocking and messing with each other. So instead of interaction into a small, little digital world, it now opens up into the rest of their space. It opens up socially. Right? This is where the technology is starting to make massive advances in terms of changing how we interact with each other and how we interact with the physical world. So as Babak said, I think I can quote this from his talk today, that where we are now with augmented reality, we're just starting to think about these notions with wearable computing and Google Glass. I like this picture. It's not the craziest picture of Thad wearing, but this is back in the Aware Home days when he and I are working in the space. And so now we have a new thread of conversation with this, a new form of the dance, which is the question of what does it mean when you're looking through into the space and you're augmenting that information. And right now the commonality seems to be the frizzy hair thing, but I like that part. So we're interested, and I'm going to come back to this a little later, and we spent a lot of time on Google Glass this morning, but we've entered a whole other set of conversations. We've entered a whole set of conversations about privacy, because these things have cameras on them. We've entered a whole set of questions about how people manage their attention and how people manage their interaction. I will admit that the biggest thing I got wrong when I was at Xerox PARC was I swore up and down that there is no way that someone would wander around the grocery store talking into thin air because they were talking to a mobile device. Clearly got that one wrong. People are doing this every day. But nevertheless, we are starting to create our new social norms around these technologies in terms of what do we expect from each other. And I want to return back to that when I talk about community. So the interesting thing about space, of course, is that it's not just how we see or perceive objects, and it's not just how we interact or play with each other over games, but space is the container, space is the frame for many of our complex processes, many of the things that we do day in and day out. We've had the advantage of working with Steelcase over the years to look at the future of workplace environments. The best way for me to describe this is Steelcase, they manufacture furniture, but what they design is collaboration. They design environments for creativity. They design environments for how people interact with each other. And of course, they noticed a decade or more ago that those worlds were changing through the addition of digital artifacts. And in many ways, beautiful designs were being broken by cables and cords and laptops and all of the technology that wasn't working on top of a physical space that should have afforded creative dialogue and exchange. So we have started working with them on the notion of how do you understand what makes a space foster creativity, what makes a space foster exchange, what makes a space foster trust in workplace environments, and how do you design systems for that? So this is a picture of one of the tables that we co-created with them, and some of the simple technology was just recognizing individuals who were in the collaboration, showing feedback of that with kinetic lighting, and then helping use the table as a way of signaling and managing turn-taking within a conversation. And then we now have a first iteration of those technologies now out by Steelcase called Mediascape. So this question of how space contains not only just in face-to-face around a table, but water cooler effects and how you interact with people casually in the hallway, and how do you foster that when those interactions are actually over multiple states, multiple contents, and multiple time zones. How do we design our spaces for these larger discourses that make up what it means for us to be human? And then, of course, space is not something that we just think about within the work, and I cut out for today, but of course we have a huge amount of work that's also done in the future spaces of homes, but then it's the future spaces of our community. One of the terrific things about being at Georgia Tech is being able to collaborate with everyone in our College of Architecture and our city design community and our partnerships there that say, what does it mean for us to design the future spaces where, again, we expect these kinds of technology to be omnipresent? What does it mean to create those types of opportunities? And so this is, our segue as we start to think, well, what does it mean to design for the social structures of community? What makes community so valuable to us as human beings? And what is the role that technology has a place in that? So I want to give you a couple examples and then talk about what we want to do going in the future. So this is a system, Jill Diamond, she's a recent graduate, called Holoback. And I love Holoback as an example of kind of the relationship between community and digital design. Holoback was a system that did a couple things. First, it was a system about reporting street harassment. So this was a social movement, social entrepreneurship within the space. And first thing they did was lower the bar to make it easy to report that, whether it's catcalls or somebody physically approaching you or, however you defined harassment, it was easy to post that up. And so it lowered the bar and it made harassment more visible. What happens in a community when you're able to open up a dialogue is then you can have community exchange and community discussions around that. And what's fascinating about Holoback was this wasn't just New York City or Atlanta or Southern California, but it was Brazil and it was locations in Europe. It was an international movement. But what you could watch with on the sites is it wasn't a one-size-fits-all technology solution, but it was a set of enablers that then allowed the communities to say, okay, with this information and with this exchange, with this dialogue, how do we as a community engage in discussions around street harassment? And you could see many different responses play out in these settings over time. So the technology was an enabler. The technology enabled a community to do what communities want to do, which is how do we create a voice for a population that feels threatened or endangered, and then how do we work through that? So a fundamental community process enabling technology, but then you had to watch it play out in the larger spaces. Mike Best's work in numerous countries in Africa, I'm pretty sure this shot is from the elections in Nigeria, looks at some of the same questions, but more formalized community processes. So Mike works with the Carter Center and other institutions around new uses of technology for election monitoring. And so this particular image was drawn from technologies that understood that if you lowered the bar for reporting misdeeds, inappropriate behavior within elections, potential fraud, potential harassment, just questions and concern that was going on, that you could monitor Twitter feeds. And you could use that as a fundamental lever within election monitoring. And part of the research that he's done is actually to show the veracity of the information that's coming in through Twitter, as well as the timeliness of the information coming in through Twitter, to be a powerful agent with respect to election monitoring. Now, this system, because of its agility, and also because the students stayed up all night working on it in real time as this was happening, was also able to be configured for another type of community response. So in this particular election, violence started to break out in a couple of areas. And so they essentially had to tweak the analytics. I make it sound easy, it wasn't. But were able to tweak the analytics so that they could adjust their Twitter feed monitoring to look for indications of violence. And were able to work with the local police in response to those. And there's actually one dramatic example where a couple of the tweeters that they were following, two women were trapped in a hotel and a mob was starting to form, and they were able to pick up their tweets and they were able to send people to assist and get them out of that environment as quickly as possible, right? This is what I mean by that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, it's not a one-size-fits-all technology, but the future technologies that we're working with, the technologies around, whether it's glass or mobility or Twitter, have the ability for communities to engage each other in new ways, ways that are both fundamental to how communities take care of each other, but ways that are new and powerful because of advances in technology. So one of the areas that is particularly hot, and we're going to hear a great deal more about here at Georgia Tech and other places, it goes by many names. I refer to it as urban computing, as well as others do as well. This question of how do you concentrate and how do you focus future computing technologies around the notion of urban design, around the notion of urban engagement. And there's a couple of formulas and a couple of approaches to this. Apparently last night, I apologize, I haven't been able to read the full story, but LA announced a major broadband initiative, right, so that all of the citizens within that surrounding area would have broadband connectivity. So a number of cities are going at it through the fat pipes perspective. If we just provide fat pipes, good things will happen. One of the things that we're doing at Georgia Tech and other folks in New York City and others are talking about public accessibility to data. How do you provide data? How do you provide information within the community, either data that is already there or data that can be created to foster the processes of the community? So one of the examples you'll be able to see in the demos is this new program intervention called Cycle Atlanta. How many people have heard of Cycle Atlanta or have used it? Terrific. All right, so Cycle Atlanta has been out there for about a year or so, and it enables cyclists with the Atlanta area to post their routes, to basically show voting with their feet, or I guess voting with their bicycles, where they want to traverse within the city of Atlanta. And then city planners can use this information to justify creation of bike lanes, to justify programs to make cycling safer within the city of Atlanta. Right? In many ways, this is the same pattern as Hollaback. This is the same pattern of election monitoring. How do you have computing that enables the voice of the community to come up and then allows for response by the community, whether that response being by an official organization or the response being by the community itself? So many of you heard last year we announced a partnership with Midtown Atlanta. We like to talk about things in terms of living laboratories, but our ambition is how does Georgia Tech embrace the Midtown community? How do we think of Midtown Atlanta as a laboratory for urban computing? And what that means for us is the question of, well, how do we create data sources? How do we archive, curate data sources that would be interesting for other groups to be able to act on? So transportation data, public safety data, data about what's going to be on an art walk this Sunday afternoon. How do we make it easy for members of the community to publish that data, to make that data available? And then how do we lower bars, whether it's through lower barriers, whether it's through the use of like Argon, augmented reality technologies, or web services, or other mobile services, for people to be able to take that data and do something interesting with it. And one of our overriding design principles in this work is that it's not just about a generic information service. It's not just about Yelp or even OpenTable, which I use all the time, but it's about how do you give voice to a community. So what is the voice of Midtown Atlanta? What is the voice if you were interacting with a service or interacting with data or interacting with one of these innovations? How would you know and feel that this spoke to you? How many Midtown residents do I have? How would you know that this spoke to you as a Midtown resident? And then if you were visiting Midtown, if you were interacting with these systems, how would you help to understand or see the view of Midtown as a local, right? So the Google Glass tour, maybe not about Hemingway, but it's about, you know, how do I think about Midtown? I've never been here before. How do locals think about Midtown? What do they see? Where do they go? Who is this Midtown Bob character? Things like that. The Tom Bob. So these are some of our ambitions, and I hope you will be hearing much more from us and others as we work within this space. But again, the formula here is not about a one-stop shop or a one-killer app, but this question of how do you create an innovation ecosystem? How do you lower the bar? How do you provide the resources? How do you provide the support so that members of the community have the opportunity to embrace and be empowered by these technologies to do something that they care about for their own community? So while we talk about communities, I want to go back a little bit to some of the questions that we have about the future being human and the future of these technologies. So I don't know how many people picked up this article. It went through my Twitter feed. September in San Francisco on a Muni bus, a man boarded the bus waving a gun, and this person was just looking to cause trouble. He was looking to kill someone. Waving a gun, no one noticed. This was a crowded bus. No one noticed because they looked essentially like these folks here. They were heads down, and apparently he had to shoot someone to get attention. Now, whether this could have been averted if someone had actually not been looking in their device or if they were wearing glass, I don't know. But the question comes for us of what is our definition of public? What is our definition of community when one way or the other, whether it's glass or mobile phones or Walkmans or what have you, we are tethered into these devices? So some of the critiques of the setting are less about, well, you know, the crazy guy could have been stopped because that was probably not going to happen in that particular case. He was eventually arrested later that night. But, you know, as a parent, as a community member, we have this notions of, okay, well, you know, my child is in a public place. It's in daylight. We have these assumptions about safety and security. We have these assumptions about the social obligations that go with community because we have expectations of how we participate when we're together. And one of the more insidious changes in our world that's less about people posting, you know, annoying pictures on Facebook may be about our lack of engagement in our social spaces because each of us are making individual decisions about how we're interacting with devices. And one thing that is clear, whether it's a Google Glass or a smartphone or whatever, is if your mind is engaged in information that is not about where you are. I mean, I know who's listening to me and who's, you know, on their device right now. If your mind is elsewhere, then your eyes might as well be elsewhere as well. So we have some questions that we need to ask about what kind of dances we're creating with these technologies, where we have to go back to fundamental questions of what do we mean by community and what are the roles of these devices and these technologies within this community. And it's not just all upside. So another example, so this is an image from Hurricane Sandy. So there's been lots of write-ups about malicious tweeting, right? And the image of the shark going down the street in New York and all sorts of the flooded stock exchange and all of this. What's been less well covered has been the perceptions, both from Sandy and from Katrina and other settings, where our community response is myopic through the lens of technology, right? So in this case, particular community so direly affected by Hurricane Sandy wasn't even on anybody's radar because nobody was tweeting about it. Well, they weren't tweeting about it because things were really bad there, right? But our notion, our assessment of what was going on was through that lens of the technology, and we think of these information feeds as truth. It's just so easy that our notion of how do we respond to a community, how do we think through might be happening through a disaster is altered through the easy availability of these technologies. So anytime that we're thinking about, okay, technologies help us do public response, technologies help us, and I don't think the official aid agencies got this wrong, but the press got it wrong, the community as a whole got it wrong, and when we think we understand what's happening, you know, across the world in different countries because of Twitter feeds that are in English, we're getting it wrong because we're getting a very narrow slice of the reality, and we're letting ourselves believe that slice. So again, this is a question not just, you know, the technology makes it easy, now what do we do? How do we continue to understand our roles and responsibilities as community members? So in the final area, I want to talk about community, and I'm transitioning to this with the world stage, that what do we think about in terms of the role of these technologies as society or as a network? What are the possibilities here, and what are the dangers, and what are going to be the issues? What are the dances that we're going to continue to grapple with? So I always like to start with Wikipedia, because Wikipedia is this terrific example of something that shouldn't have happened. It shouldn't be possible. Right? If anybody had predicted ahead of time that we were going to be able to write a worldwide encyclopedia of knowledge from all of these different perspectives, and that the information would be pretty much factual, no one would have believed it. And I feel like I need to have a letter that I send to my daughter's teachers every single year that says, studies have shown that Wikipedia, with rare exceptions, is far more accurate than that Encyclopedia Britannica that my parents bought for me when I was a kid. Right? It just works. So it works in a way that is fundamental to how human beings make sense of knowledge, how we create knowledge, And as long as Google is helping us access it in reasonable ways, it helps you answer that question earlier about the relationship of Google and human knowledge. But Wikipedia is just scraping the surface. So this is a pointer to a system called World Without Oil. I don't know, where are my digital media folks who might have heard of this? So World Without Oil, let's see if I can get the definition of this right. It's a transmedia gaming experience, which is hard to believe unless you go check it out. So this is a web-based game that played for months. And the premise of the game, so it's called an alternate reality game. So you're playing that game within the context of your real-world experience. And the context of the game is that essentially oil is going to all but disappear in our human society. What are you going to do? And so as you participate in this game, and thousands amongst thousands of people participated in this game over time, you participate through how you change your perception of what you do in your world. So people started biking to work. People started planting food in their front yards. People wrote blogs. People made videos, some of them more dramatic, some of them more mundane. But they went through a collective experience of writing a narrative of a world without oil. This isn't something that we could have done before, right? So we could have had movies, or we could have had just pure fiction that was written and publicized in books or our readers. But this is a collective co-authorship of a narrative about a topic that people both found extremely compelling and a topic that enabled them to change their behavior in powerful ways. Tremendously exciting. Of course, you can't talk about the network and social without mentioning Facebook, and we're not going to do a deep dive here. One of the things that's going on is, of course, is that anybody who's a social science researcher is now like heady with glee, because you're able to now look at all of these fundamental questions about how does society operate, and now you have people offering data up to gazillions by the second, right? So this question of how do we build community, how do we build relationships, what is trust, what is the notion of friendship, how do people act on that? Again, it's not the perfect observatory, right? So all of our lessons about what we see and don't see, but it is a terrific set of questions for us. And what will change with this as a society is then how do we think about the availability of this data and other data in terms of how do we make sense of the human existence. I work in healthcare, so I can talk forever about all of the opportunities that are in the healthcare space, but if you've heard of things like Patients Like Me, if you've read the reports of new side effects for drugs being discovered through Bing searches, right? So this notion of a drug being available out and prescribed in the world, but enough people typed in drug name, nausea, vomiting, and I'm not sure that those are the right two, that you could actually see you could detect the emergence of an unknown side effect through people's interaction with these systems. All right, that's terrifically interesting. All right, there's also people doing work on detecting women who are more likely to have postpartum depression because of their Twitter post. Okay, that's interesting. Gets a little exciting. All right, so what does it mean for kind of predictive or proactive medicine to work with in this case? And then there's this question of N equals 1 health, which is when there's enough data about you, your own personal cloud of health data, that you become your own norm, so that medicine is no longer operating off of population norms. It's informed by population norms, but it's interacting off of your own personal norm. Tremendous potential, tremendous concern. How many people have heard the Target story? So Target was doing consumer analytics based on what people bought to determine when a woman was pregnant, so they could start advertising to her immediately about all the great stuff she should buy at Target. I think it would be folic acid would be the thing you would look for, but there were particular purchasing patterns that were like way before you've told anyone, like for example your father. Target could identify that you were pregnant and send personalized advertising to you. Teenage daughter, he called up, yelled at Target, then he had to write back, said, sorry, I was wrong. All right. He wasn't wrong. I mean, he was incorrect about his daughter. What Target was doing was able to take information that, from a privacy perspective, okay, they are allowed to see what I purchase at Target. They were able to generate what should be private health information off of consumer patterns. Kate Crawford has this terrific article on what she calls predictive privacy, right? So we're all focused on HIPAA and what medical data can actually be exchanged. What we're not focusing on is all of the things that can be gleaned by data that is not private, but generates private data, but is not accessible now by our legal system. So tremendous questions within this space. And then, of course, we started, and we will end on the topic of the Internet of Things, right? So Target was able to do their analytics off of consumer behavior, right? But consumer behavior is where you drive your car, where are you walking your dog, how are you, what was the example that was either Bill or Jeff, somebody used within the discussion yesterday about you must have had a really big party over the holidays. Every single house has its own electrical fingerprint, right? And deviations from those fingerprints are pretty easy to see, right? So this notion of take predictive privacy and think about detecting that people are pregnant based on Target, and think about all the things that can be detected by us based on our question of what can be discerned from our use and our interaction in this networked world. The World Economic Forum refers to this phenomenon as hyperconnectivity, right? And hyperconnectivity means that viruses can move from one side of the world to another at the speed of a jumbo jet, but it also means that information can be gleaned and disseminated about each of us kind of at the speed of electrons. So I am neither glasses half full or glasses half empty, but these are the questions that we need to ask as we're understanding the dances that we are creating. It's not just about technology, it's not just about people and social norms, but it's how these things are playing out together. So things that we will continue to talk about and things that you will experience in the demonstrations, this relationship of what is natural about our bodies, what is natural about what we think of how the physical world works, and how do we continue to put those conceptions onto our interactions with the digital world, and how do we design for that going forward. How do we think about space and place? Steve Harrison, I worked with him at Xerox PARC, and he had this great distinction that space is the physicality, but place is when we put our understood conventions and our norms around it. You know, the place of a library is different than a Barnes & Noble, is different than a Starbucks, right? Because of everything, the conventions around it. It's not just whether books are in the place or not. Space or not. So it's about how we interact with each other. How do we take our understanding of placeness and then imbue our spaces with that in new and interesting ways because of technology? And of course, we do that within our physical spaces, our buildings and our homes, but we also have to think about this in terms of how we design for communities as a whole, right? What is Midtown? What does Midtown mean? What does Midtown mean in terms of walkability, in terms of how people interact with each other? Is it a friendly space, a friendly community where people can interact with each other easily? If that's the case, then what do we do in the digital realm to amplify that, to make that part of the placeness, to make that part of the culture and custom of Midtown? If Midtown is a place of diverse opinions and diverse lifestyles, how do we make that tangible in our experiences of Midtown when it's mediated by technology? How do we engage the fundamental processes of community building? You know, the fun discussions that take place on, you know, the Virginia Highland mailing list, for example. What does it mean to take those community processes, what makes us human as community members, and continue to amplify and enable those? And then what is our obligation within those spaces, within those places, within the community? It's one thing to say, okay, we're going to have a social contract of how we take pictures with each other with Google Glass, and we'll see how that plays out. It's another thing when our public places are no longer safe because we're so distracted by what's happening there. Police are already talking about this, you know, all of the iPhone robberies, right? And all the reports are like, well, that person came out of nowhere. Well, no, that person actually came from just over there. You just didn't see them because you were so distracted. My mom's perceptive, but she can tell when I'm looking at the computer, when I'm talking to her on the phone, because she can tell when I'm not paying attention. Hate it that she can do that. So what are our obligations of how we interact with each other as a society, and how are we allowing technologies to undermine those obligations? You know, it's not just about turning off your cell phone when you go into a movie theater. And then finally, what does it mean for us to live in a hyper-connected world? What does it mean for us to be connected in terms of jumbo jets, in terms of electrons, in terms of social media, in terms of all the wonderful things that we can collectively put together, and then for all the things that will be disseminated and shared from that. Healthcare is going to be turned on its head. Government monitoring, clearly already in the discussion, right? We're living in a different world, and we don't have the luxury of saying, well, that's just a legal issue, or that's just a technology issue, or someone else is going to take care of that. Because, as Thad said, what we do here at Georgia Tech is we create living laboratories. We're supposed to be the folks who are trying to peer into the horizon of what's happening, and that's not just on the future of batteries or on the future of encryption, but that's on the future of how these technologies play out in our social settings that are deeply meaningful to us, that make up what we mean to be human. So as you go forward today, think about something you probably didn't intend to think about. Think about dancing. Think about the dance between people and technology. Think about the dances that we're creating. Think about elegant dances. Think about tangos. Think about how technology steps on your toes. And come back and continue to ask questions, continue to demand of us what this future should be like. So thank you very much. And now, the bit with the dog. So I'd like to introduce, all right, we're good? I would like to introduce a longtime friend and then my assistant. So the longtime friend is Professor Melody Moore Jackson. Where's your glass?
He gets confused by it.
He gets confused by the glass. I get confused by the glass. Melanie and I have known each other for way too long, which meant that we were in grad school together. But she, as well as Thad and a number of folks here at Georgia Tech, are working on this new project called Fido, which is, she'll get to do all the demonstrations and research, but it's basically about how you let dogs talk and communicate and interact with you. So somebody asked Babbitt why he wasn't using glass to change the slides. Well, I've got something way better. Sky is going to change the slides for me while I tell you about our research showcase. All right, so Sky, are we ready? All right, let's talk. All right, so at the showcase, which is going to be right across the street. Sky, come on. Thank you. You're going to be able to see, no, back one, Sky. He only wants to go forwards. All right. Sky, one slide, please. Sky wants you to focus on him. All right. You're going to be able to see lots of demonstrations. I'm going to talk fast. Future of our robotic interaction, some of our gestural interfaces. I actually think that's Mark Gusdell's son. Future of how digital media is enabling us to engage and process the journalism. Sky, now can you give me some help? You're also going to be able to hear about this cool project called Fido, which is where Sky and other dogs are being trained to be able to communicate, whether they're bomb-sniffing dogs or assistant dogs, and really allowing them to be able to tell all that they know through the uses of these technologies. All right, can I show some more pictures, Sky? So you're also going to be able to hear some, remember I talked to you about Cycle Atlanta, some of the work that Clint is doing in terms of wearable technologies and the future of these technologies as they become integrated in our clothing. You're going to hear about GT Mob, which is part of our innovation ecosystem, and how we help people write new mobile applications and services based on community needs. So if I go into the logistics and details and the boring stuff, Sky. No, Sky, I have to talk about the details, not just about pictures of you. Okay, Sky wants you to make sure that you know where to come see his demo, but can you, thank you, Sky. And a bit with the dog. So you're going to walk right across the street. You're going to walk right across the street. Lunch is going to be available in multiple locations. So just follow where the grad students have already eaten all the food.
A little false positive.
I love you, Sky. Demos are going to be going on from now until 3:30, and then proceed to the ground floor at TSRB. It'll be easy to find us for our closing receptions. So, Sky, one more. One more, Sky. One more. Not your picture, Sky. Thank you. Thank you for attending. Please note our dates for next year.